It's a well-known fact within the Genshin community that the next region we'll be travelling to is Inazuma, the land of Electro. So of course this new region will be bringing another Archon, which will be Baal, the god of eternity. We get into more information about her character and personality in our video about Inazuma if you want to check that out, but this video won't go into that kind of stuff. You see, so far we've been able to unlock the Archons as playable characters, and so we can assume that we'll be able to play as Baal at some point. So what would she be like to play as? What would her elemental skill and burst be, and what weapon would she use? Before we get into it though, I need to point out that this video is entirely speculation, since we know nothing about what Baal is actually going to be like. But let's get into it. So right off the bat, we have to point out that Baal is going to be an antagonist in Inazuma, the first evil Archon we've seen yet in fact. But despite this, we can still expect her to become a playable character eventually. Now the reason I say this is all down to one character, Tartaglia. He's a playable character, but he's also one of the Fatui Harbingers, so he's one of the bad guys. So yeah, Baal is probably going to be playable. Now that's cleared up though, we can get into what she'll be like to play as. So let's start with the simplest thing to speculate, which is what weapon she'll use. Now this may seem like there's no clue, but we do actually have one guess. You see, so far each Archon has had a unique combination of vision and weapon. So of course we know that Baal will be an Electro user, but is there a weapon that no Electro characters use? Well, yeah, there is. There's no Electro polearm user, so our best guess is that Baal will use a polearm. Admittedly, the unique combination of weapon and elements so far is almost completely coincidental. There's also the fact that the last Archon we've had also uses a polearm. However, this is inevitable eventually. After all, there's 7 Archons but only 5 weapons, so unless any new weapons get added, there's gonna have to be at least 2 repeated weapons. You may have seen various leaks for Baal, many of which use swords, but most of these are either inspired by or just blatant copies of another character, Raiden Mei from Genshin Impact 3rd. She also uses a sword and does look very much like she could be the Electro Archon, but make sure you don't fall for these supposed leaks. Okay, so before we can tell what her elemental skill or burst might be, we should figure out what role she would play in the party. So far, both Archons excel as support roles, so it would be fair to assume that the other Archons would follow suit. However, I don't think that this will be the case. Instead, what if the role of the Archons in a party is dependent on what they're the god of? Think about it. Barbatos is the god of freedom, so it would make sense that he wouldn't be the main fighter. Instead, he would support the others and let them be free to do what they want. What about Morax then? He's the god of contracts, so why is he a support? Well, he's all about upholding contracts or supporting them. So now on to Baal then. Baal is the god of eternity, but which role is suited to eternity the most? You could make an argument for a healer since healing is linked to eternal life. However, I'm inclined to say that she would be a DPS. She claims to be the strongest Archon, being nearest unto heaven. Therefore, the role of DPS is only suited. DPS also makes sense because of her being a suppressive leader, so her being more violent and also being the main character on a team fits with what we know about her. Okay, so now we know her role, we can take some guesses at what her attacks might be. I'll start with her elemental burst, because surprisingly I think that will be easier to speculate. Now I say that because if we look at Venti and Zhongli's bursts, they're pretty much the rawest elemental power possible. Venti's burst summons the wind, and he's the god of wind, and Zhongli's summons a massive rock, and he's the god of earth. Therefore, I think it's easier to predict Baal's burst, since if it follows the pattern, it should just summon raw electro energy. So while it may sound super basic, my best guess is that it just summons a lightning bolt. Since we think she'll be a DPS, this bolt could simply deal a large amount of damage, but if we were to give it a secondary effect, then maybe it could deal continuous electro damage to enemies in the vicinity, a bit like Lisa's burst. It's much harder to predict an elemental skill, however, simply because they're so much more diverse for each character. We can't even really look at the existing Archons for inspiration, since to me there's not really a clear link between their skills. Venti's elemental skill creates a wind current below the player, which can be used to initiate aerial attacks. Zhongli's skill differs slightly depending on if it's charged or not. If it's not charged, it will throw a pillar of rock at the enemy, which can also be used to climb or hide behind. If you do charge it, then you throw the pillar, but it doesn't stay there. Instead, you gain a shield around you. Okay, so I know that I said I couldn't find any link between them, but there is potentially one link that I've spotted. It's a bit vague, but both Venti and Zhongli's skills modify the terrain somehow. Actually, maybe it's more appropriate to say that they can both be used outside of battle to great effect to help the traveller get around the terrain. Both existing Archon skills help the traveller traverse vertically up mountains or cliffs, so what other terrain obstacles are there in the game? Well, the ones which I've managed to come up with are bodies of water, large crevices, sheer cold and big falls. Admittedly, a few of them aren't really obstacles, like sheer cold, which is more of a status effect. If you can think of any other obstacles, by the way, make sure to leave them in the comments, but let's run through our list and see what obstacle would fit the most with the character we've been creating. Bodies of water doesn't really make sense, they would be more suited towards a cryo character, and besides, it's not very good when electricity comes in contact with water. Again, sheer cold doesn't really make sense with an electro character, that's more suited to a pyro wielder. That leaves us with gaps or crevices, or large drops. I can see both of these being valid skills, but it might be difficult to integrate fast downward movement into a battle scenario, so instead I'm going to pick large gaps. The best solution to this obstacle that I can think of is to quickly move horizontally, like a dash. If you've ever played the game Celeste, by the way, I picture it like dashing and that. We should also make the cooldown pretty short so that you can use it in succession across a gap. In battle, maybe you would transform into electro energy and dash quickly forwards into the enemies. Then I guess the charged version would either make it more powerful or make you go further. But yeah, that's all of the attacks covered. Of course, this video was completely speculation, since we haven't got any clues on the appearance or attacks of Baal. If you want a video about Baal and the rest of Inazuma with some more solid evidence, check out our Inazuma video, which is linked in the description. This video was really just a bit of self-indulgent fun, so take it with a grain of salt. If you have any better ideas than I did, which you probably will do, make sure to leave them in the comments, along with anything I may have missed as usual. Lastly, make sure to subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed this kind of theoretical speculation. But I think that's everything covered, so have a good one.